Hi everyone, this video will go over stage 2 of the UbD curriculum template. Notice there are 2 parts to complete, performance tasks and other evidence. Here in stage 2 is where you will collect evidence that shows students have met your big ideas from stage 1. Stage 2 is not meant to be just a list of traditional quizzes and tests that require students to recall facts or show if they can memorize. It is intended to list a variety of ways that students can show they can do more than memorize, that they understand the concepts of the unit. So the best way to measure true understanding is through transfer, asking students to apply their learning in a new situation with little or no scaffolding or cues provided. Asking students to transfer will require communication on your part early in the year. This communication is necessary to combat the frustrations you'll hear from students who complain to their parents that the homework did not look exactly like the example in class, or there was a problem on the test that we had never seen before. In my experience, if students and parents know that transfer is the expectation from the start, students will most likely rise to the challenge with limited complaints. In the Stage 3 video, you will learn more about putting opportunities for transfer in your learning plan. A common misconception is that all transfer must be real world. This is not true. Transfer does not necessarily have to be real world as long as students are being asked to apply their learning in a different way. A performance task, however, must have a real world scenario to maximize student engagement and as a result, student effort. But keep in mind that not every real world activity or project that you already do is a performance task. It needs to have that curveball transfer scenario in order to be a true performance task. So to help us develop more authentic assessments with those curveball scenarios, we use grasps for every performance task. To compare it to sports, as opposed to the scaffolded and simplified drills that might show up on a traditional quiz or at a sports practice, the performance task is the game. Since it's set in a novel situation, the student has to think through what the task demands as part of the assessment, just like they would have to instinctively think of what to do and how to apply their skills in a game. So we want to include this GRASP acronym in every performance task paragraph that we write. So for the goal, this is what the student's purpose is. Are they designing, creating, defending something, critiquing? What's their role? Are they an engineer, illustrator, newscaster, politician? Who are they presenting to? Who's their audience? Who is it targeted to? Is it the CEO of some company, the community, another country's leader? What's their situation? What's the context? Is it in the courtroom, a political rally, an interview, an art show? What's the product they're creating? Is it a video, a song, an advertisement, a proposal? And what standards can you give them to show how their success will be measured? Right? So this grasp will help us create a realistic scenario in which students confront the same kinds of challenges, constraints, and options that they'll find in the real world. English teachers can check me on this one, but I'm pretty sure it's called second person imperative or command form. Basically, you want the performance task to be in a paragraph, but you want to try to avoid the use of you. So it's kind of like the unspoken you. It's still in that command form where you're saying, like, as an engineer, create a proposal that blah, blah, blah. Or as a purchasing manager for the county, justify the budget for new recycling bins, dot, dot, dot. So notice like how this sample of an Algebra 2 performance task in our district follows that GRASP form, right? Right. The goal is to present this proposal to an Amazon client of new box dimensions. They have to stay in their budget, right? Every detail in that GRASP acronym is hit. So it's creating like a meaningful assessment for our students, and I think students are going to be more likely to put in, genuine effort if it's like that. You also want to avoid scaffolding, so you don't want to break up the tasks into steps unless it's absolutely necessary. I realize these performance tasks are going to be given to different levels, so you may need to tweak them as necessary. But again, I've done some performance tests in CP classes where I've told students, that the expectation is transfer. If they really get stuck, they can ask me a question. But I have noticed that they will rise to the challenge if I tell them that, I want them to try to do it on their own with limited questions. It also can be a partner or group activity if an individual component is included. So remember, the goal is sufficient evidence for each student. So if you are doing a group performance task, you just need to match it with evidence for the individual's understanding. So you might need to have like a part 2 that's like an individual thing, or like a separate like subtask in which maybe the roles and the perspective change, just for that autonomy. Here's another one in our district from a Latin course. Notice that this one also has the enduring understanding listed at the end. The Amazon one did not, so you do need to make sure that every enduring understanding from stage 1 is assessed in a performance task. Ideally, you want to come up with one global performance task that will assess all of the enduring understandings. But if that's not possible, then just create more than one performance task and just list which enduring understandings that it matches with. Notice these samples are also like typically open-ended. They don't necessarily yield a single correct answer. And a common issue with writers in the past is sometimes, when writers see that it has to be real world, they immediately think of a good real world project that they've done in the past, but you don't want to replace your projects and turn them into a performance task, right? Keep your good projects, keep them in the learning plan. This is supposed to be an additional assessment. It doesn't have to be super long. It could be done, in a class period. It could be, a homework assessment. It doesn't even have to be graded. So just keep it in mind that, there's a lot of flexibility with these. And the goal is to raise the bar for our assessments in the district. Keep in mind also that when you're looking at old units, these were written, 7-8 years ago. So don't assume that the performance tasks that you see in old versions of your same curriculum are great. Some of them, were when we were fresh in the UbD training. So our goal is to raise the bar in each of the 3 stages, including the performance task. All right, so next we've got a little performance test checklist. This is also found, I think, in the Google Classroom. But just something to point out that when the checklist says, does it allow for rigor, we don't mean difficulty in the amount of skills required. Although the performance test could require several skills, when we mention rigor, we're talking about in terms of the transfer of understanding it requires, right? So not necessarily how many skills are required to do the task, but the critical thinking and that ability to transfer knowledge and skills to that new situation. That's what we mean by rigor. All right, so remember back to the stage 2 template that there is also a second part to complete called other evidence. This is where you're going to list how you'll assess other knowledge and skills that were not assessed in one of the performance tasks. All right, so you are able to put typical tests and quizzes here, but just keep in mind that as you begin to list the ways you're going to assess the other goals from stage 1, keep in mind that this section is intended to be a place where teachers can get ideas for good and different assessments, right? This is your chance to get creative and raise the bar for non-traditional assessments in your course. Also remember that assessment does not have to equal grading. You can assess without grading, or you can assess on a grading scale. If the task is difficult and new for students, or depending on the level of students, grade accordingly. Maybe you have a really good transfer question to list here as a ticket to leave, but maybe only half the class gets it correct. You don't have to give half the class a 0, but it does give you evidence that half the class doesn't understand the goals from stage 1 enough to transfer them. All right, and then lastly, in case you're wondering why we're doing UbD or transfer or why we should use performance tasks, keep in mind your department's long-term learning goals. I put one from each department on here to remind you what's most important in our teaching, not just the acquisition and recalling of facts, but more so what they will take with them 10 years from now, right? Like, what are students going to take away from your course 10 years from now, right? Hopefully it's one of these long-term learning goals, and hopefully you used these to help you create transfer goals and enduring understandings in stage 1. Now it's time in stage 2 to make sure we are creating assessments that will give evidence of whether these long-term goals and enduring understandings have been met.